Welcome to Train Signal. This is the Publishing Servers lesson in the Forefront Threat Management Gateway 2010 training course. In this lesson, you'll learn all about publishing servers from a mostly overview perspective, but by the end of the lesson, you'll have actually published your first server out to the internet. You're going to learn about the components that make up server publishing, as well as getting a quick overview of the actual server publishing process so that you can gain an understanding of the major tasks that you have to perform to make this operation work. Then we'll go over a few additional notes regarding application filters in publishing. And as I said, by the end of this lesson, you'll move on to actually publishing a server. GlobalMantix has a number of services that need to be accessed by remote users. Because this is such an integral part of the Threat Management Gateway service, a baseline understanding of this application publishing system is in order. By the end of this lesson, you'll learn the basics behind server publishing. You'll understand how different stages of the communications flow operate, and you'll have enabled remote access to a domain controller for GlobalMantix IT staff so they can do management from anywhere. Up to this point in the course, we've focused on the internal to external communication scenario. This is basically where users on the internal network are able to securely access internet-based resources by virtue of rules that are created on the Threat Management Gateway system. However, a huge part of a firewall's purpose in life is to enable inbound access to specified services. This is an external to internal access rule. With server publishing, you can create rules that will publish these servers in a secure way to groups of users, such as internet users. In Threat Management Gateway, two major categories of publishing rules are web and server publishing rules. As the name implies, web publishing rules are used to publish HTTP and HTTPS-based resources, generally web servers. Server publishing rules, on the other hand, are used for pretty much everything else, non-web resources. They're used for all other inbound access to protected networks. When it comes to server publishing, there are three major 30,000-foot view steps that have to be taken. First of all, you have to choose the server that holds the service you'd like to publish. Next, select the protocol being served by that server that you want to publish. If necessary, you can override the default protocol settings. Next, you have to choose what's called a listener IP address on the network on which the service should listen for incoming requests. Simply put, this is the external internet-based IP address to which users will connect to access that internal resource. So, how do various network configurations affect how you access resources through Threat Management Gateway? Let's start with network address translation. When you're using network address translation, a Threat Management Gateway owned IP address is published by the server published rule. Basically, you have that whole listener thing that we talked about, and we'll see that in action soon. Clients request the published resource via the client-facing adapter on the Threat Management Gateway server. So if the client is out on the internet, it's going to be the external network adapter through which clients will access that resource. Requests are not made directly to the internal server, although it may appear that way. Threat Management Gateway intermediates the communication so that rules can be applied to the communication. By default, when the client sends a request to an internal resource, the client's source address is also sent to the published server. But you can change this setting to specify that the source address sent to the published server is that of the Threat Management Gateway server. In some cases, you may want to do that for an additional level of security perchance. When you have a routed network, Forefront Threat Management Gateway listens for requests on the IP address of the published server. Clients request resources using the IP address of the internal server directly. Clients connect directly to the IP address. Now, this is really going to happen generally when you're using internal to perimeter or perimeter to internal communication, because those are generally the routed networks. In a lot of cases these days, because of the reduction in the number of available IPv4 addresses, a lot of organizations use NAT, network address translation, to get out to the internet. So the previous set of rules that I discussed is probably going to be in use in many, many organizations here. So, what is a listener? A listener is a service that listens on a specified IP address for traffic that's destined for that IP address. and it's associated with a rule at some point so that traffic is directed to an internal service. Listeners are generally identified pretty late in the publishing process. This is through a wizard that we'll see in just a little while. Listeners use IP addresses that are bound to the network adapter, so these IP addresses have to be present on the network adapter that you intend to use. In a lot of cases, this will be the external network adapter. Listeners, however, are not created for services that are accessible as a result of a defined network route. This is the job of an application filter, which handles those kinds of requests. And you'll see listeners again in just a few minutes. So, what can you publish? From a protocol perspective, you can publish using any one of the default protocols that are available in Threat Management Gateway. And you can override protocol defaults if necessary. For example, if you wanted to publish an FTP server on a port other than port 21, you can do so and still have clients access that service over port 21. Basically, what would happen is you would create a listener on port 21 that would then be associated with a publishing rule that forwards requests to port 5021 if that's the port you've selected for your FTP server. So this is a way that you can actually have Threat Management Gateway modify the communication stream in a way that might better fit your organization for whatever reason. But you're not limited to just what already exists on Threat Management Gateway. You can create a new protocol type if you like, and the protocol type can be TCP, UDP, ICMP, or a general IP protocol. In most cases, you're going to be working with TCP, Transmission Control Protocol, or UDP, User Datagram Protocol, protocols. You can also specify your direction, inbound or outbound. In our case here for Global Mantix, the direction will generally be inbound communication that we're working with. You can then work with the port range, which is the TCP or UDP ports. For example, TCP is port 21, HTTP is port 80, SSL is port 443, and so on and so forth. And then the ICMP properties, and we'll take a look at those in the console in just a few minutes. Before we move on to an example, I want to make sure that you're aware of a few other things. Be mindful of your application filter configuration. Just because you allow a particular kind of traffic doesn't mean that things will behave as per the rule that you define specifically. Application filters can play a significant role in how applications will behave. If you have a configuration in which Threat Management Gateway is using a single network adapter, you can't use server publishing rules. Next up, only one server protocol combination can be specified in a server publishing rule. If you have to specify or need to specify multiple servers and protocols, you'll have to use separate rules. And make sure to plan your rules well so that the end user experience remains positive. And if you intend to use Threat Management Gateway to bridge requests, understand the full communications flow before you begin. And when I mentioned bridging requests, that would be when you make a protocol change like I mentioned before, like publishing FTP externally on port 21, but hosting it internally on port 5021. Now, Global Mantix wants to publish an FTP server for one of their partners. Our focus here will be on this common publishing scenario, and this is publishing using an existing NAT-based network. Global Mantix will do this sharing via FTP. They're going to share files with one of their partners via FTP. The company has installed an IIS-based FTP server that resides in the perimeter network, and internally this server does happen to operate on TCP port 5021, just as I mentioned before. Your job, should you choose to accept it, is to create a server publishing rule that will allow FTP access to this server from the internet over port 21, so using standard ports from the internet. Global Mantix has an administrative publishing need that they want to accomplish through the use of a publishing rule on the Threat Management Gateway server. Our focus here is going to be on a common publishing scenario, publishing using an existing NAT-based network. That is, access to a network from the internet through access address translation type systems, such as the one in use at Global Mantix. So this publishing need lies around the fact that IT needs remote desktop access to a domain controller for remote IT support. This sharing is accomplished via the RDP protocol, a very common way to remotely access servers. As such, Global Mantix has enabled the remote desktop system for administration on the server named DC1. So internally, the machine is already accessible via remote desktop. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to create a server publishing rule that will allow RDP access to this server from the internet. Now, let's go over to a Threat Management Gateway Server console and work this magic. And as you can see, we're back at the Threat Management Gateway console, and I'm in the Firewall Policy area. In the Tasks pane, I'm going to choose Publish a Non-Web Server Protocol, and I'm going to call this RDP to DC1. That's the name of the rule that I want to create. We're going to enable the Remote Desktop Protocol to the server name DC1, and click Next. Well, what is that server IP address? I'll click Browse, type DC1, and click Find. And you're going to see that it comes up with the IP address right in the box. And it fills it in for me right here. And I'll click Next again. The selected protocol is going to be on this list. And we'll come down a little bit, and we're going to find the Terminal Services server. If I wanted to modify some of the information, I could, but I can make it by clicking the Ports button. But I'm going to keep the actual defaults in place for this particular demonstration. This is going to publish using the default port and send requests to the default port on the published server. I can look at the RDP properties as well to get some information about this particular protocol. And you'll see if I go over to the parameters page, this tells me what port this is. It's 3389, and some other information that's not all that important for this particular purpose. And click Next. I want to listen on the external network. The address I want to use, which I accomplish by clicking the Address button, is a specified IP address. I want to add an IP 192.168.160.21. I chose that pretty much at random. It doesn't matter. And you'll see that that shows up over here in the Selected IP Addresses window. This is the address to which I will connect from the internet. And I'll click OK. So here you can see that we've got the network listener created now. This is going to be on the external network adapter with this IP address. And I'll click Next. And this is where I get the finished page. I can run through the settings to make sure I did it right. And click Finish to create the rule. Well, let me open up the rule just so you can see everything. The rule is enabled. The action is to allow. You've seen some of this stuff before. The traffic type is RDP. We saw that before as well. From anywhere, that's going to be pretty typical, so we're going to allow the connection to happen from anywhere. Now, if you wanted to secure this rule a little bit, and let's say you were working with a consulting company that was going to help you manage your domain controller, you could set a list of IP addresses that are allowed based on what IP addresses are in use by the consulting company. So by opening up that properties page, you can see that you can make some modifications, but you can add a different network object that would allow you to restrict access to this rule, but we're not going to do that here. And we're going to go to DC1, which is the 254 address, and we're connected to the external network. And for the schedule, always. And again, we have some options here, or we can create a new schedule if we like. And then we click OK. Now apply the rule. I'll get rid of that. Click Apply. And click OK. Now, I'm going to go over to a Windows 7 machine from the internet, and we're going to try to attach to 192.160.21. Make sure I type that right here. Yep, everything looks good. And I've already started the remote desktop connection tool, and I've provided the IP address right here in the computer box. I'll click Connect, and you're going to see that I'm being asked for my credentials. Well, I'll choose to type in the password, and I'll click OK. I'm going to get some information saying that I am connecting to the server name DC1. This is a very good sign that this is working, but the certificate is not from a trusted certifying authority because I'm not using a real certificate system here. I'll click Yes, and you'll see that I am now on DC1. And you can see I'm running Active Directory users and computers. If I go to the Start menu and actually open up the computer details, you'll see very quickly that this is indeed the server named DC1. So everything worked exactly as it was supposed to, and the rule was it forwarded all the incoming requests to the server named DC1. This is good. We started off by making sure you had a good understanding of the server publishing process in general, as well as an overview of the three major components to server publishing. Next, you learned about the actual components themselves, such as listeners. Next, you learned about the publishing communications flow. And then you got a little bit more information about application filters and publishing notes. And from there, you learned how to publish a server to enable easier management for the GlobalMantix IT staff. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.